And welcome back again to the PMO Leader 4th Annual Conference from the APAC region. It's with great pleasure that I am bringing our next speaker up on board for us, Adrian Morey, who is from Brisbane, Queensland. That's where he might live, but he's certainly a global ambassador to all things projects and PMO. We're very fortunate, and we've been, as we are with every speaker, but maybe a little bit extra with Adrian, because he has shared with us a fabulous pack to go through in what all things about getting your steering committee right, and that's right with a right like that. So it's something that I've been looking over the past couple of weeks. So welcome again, Adrian, to the group. To give everyone a bit of a background on Adrian, he is a director of his group called Outcome Advisory, market leader and advisor and author. One of the things that Adrian is well renowned for is his P3G, so that's Global Expert in Project, Program and Portfolio Governance. And I would suggest you all look up, if you want to connect with Adrian on LinkedIn, go and have a look and you'll see some fabulous articles in there. He's spanning domains of technology, transformation, infrastructure, and for purpose driving organisational success through design and implementation of tailored project, program and portfolio governance and management arrangements. Now, and that ties in very nicely with him being the subject matter expert on blueprint for getting the steering committees right. So welcome, Adrian, and I'm going to hand over to you for your session, please.
Committees right. Julie's done me the honour of introducing me, so we won't dwell on that any further. So what we'll cover today: why is project governance important? What are project steering committees? What are the essential ingredients for getting them right? And so where you can get some more insights on project steering committees. But firstly, let's cover why is project governance important. Well, let's see what project governance is first. Project governance is defined as the process of decision-making. So at the heart of governance is decision-making. So decision-making on projects and programs make steering committee decision-making efficient and effective. So at the heart of project governance is decision-making, and that's twinned with accountability. So when we say we're holding somebody to account, we also need to empower them with decision-making authority. But why is it important? Well, we've all read various stats in various different publications and from eminent bodies that give us information in terms of success rates. And whether we're talking about objectives, outputs or outcomes, many projects fail to realise some of those objectives, outcomes or outputs. So whether we're talking about objectives, outputs or outcomes, and whether we're talking about different measures, failure rates are significant. And so we should understand why some of those failures occur. And project governance is a commonly cited cause of project failure. So that's why a focus on project governance is important. I spend a lot of time working with organisations to optimize their project, program and portfolio governance arrangements. And one of the things we talk about a lot are steering committees. So firstly, what are steering committees? They're governance bodies, first of all. They bring together key stakeholders that enable governance, decision-making and a focus on material matters. And we'll come on to that concept of material matters. It's an important concept to ensure that steering committees are focused on the right things. They have oversight responsibility, monitoring delivery performance and outcome performance. And again, these are two terms I will use. Delivery performance, I'm talking about time, cost, quality, scope. Outcome performance, I'm talking about the outcomes and benefits that arise from that particular project. So those are two key things that project steering committees need to have oversight of. Steering committees need to provide direction, strategic direction, and ensure that materially that project is going to contribute toward organisational or enterprise goals. It should also provide guidance and support, guidance, advice, resources and support to the project manager and the team. At the end of the day, project steering committees support the project sponsor. So whilst we often call them decision-making groups, they help the project sponsor make optimal decisions.
Oh, sorry, Adrian, to jump in. I'm just wanting to let you know that we can't, where the slides aren't moving forward if you wanted them to. That's just a presentation mode. As if you jump into present, there you go. Jump into presentation mode. That'd be great. Thank you, Adrian.
Well, that was in presentation mode, sorry. So is that?
So, yep, so that's good. Now we can see what are the steering committees. And if you can, it's not coming up as expanded. That's the only problem. But besides it, the content looks great.
We'll stick with this view then, if that's okay.
Yep.
Apologies for that. What are steering committees? So we've covered that they have intent to provide governance, oversight, direction, guidance, and support. As I've said, project steering committees support the project sponsor. The project sponsor is accountable for project success, and so steering committees help them make the optimal decisions. But what are optimal decisions? Optimal decisions are the right decisions made at the right time by the right people and based upon the right information and insights. And insights is important there. And they're supported by the right decision processes and pathways. So that's what steering committees are. So how do we get them right? So if we consider that, what are the essential ingredients for getting project steering committees right? Well, effectively, there's 7 different areas that we need to focus on to optimize the value that project steering committees can provide. We need to look at the right purpose and responsibilities, the right project sponsor, the right membership, the right authorities and decisions, processes, the right things, so focus on the right things, material matters, and the right information at the right time and right processes, practices and behaviours. So let's unpack each of those in turn. So the right purpose and responsibilities. Obviously, steering committees don't exist in a vacuum. They typically exist in a hierarchy along with other project steering committees, maybe program boards or program steering groups, and maybe portfolio or investment committees. So there needs to be a logical relationship between each of those and the associated stakeholder and advisory groups, so to ensure that there's no overlaps or ambiguities. Each steering committee needs to have clearly defined responsibilities and operational arrangements, and that's typically captured in a terms of reference or a charter. But often what's overlooked is you often need to accompany that with role statements for key individuals, key accountable persons, or key roles that support the governance arrangements. So typically you'd also accompany a project steering committee with a role statement for the project sponsor. Project steering committee goals and activities that materially contribute to strategic objectives should be the aim of project steering committees. That's their purpose, and they need to add value. The next thing we need to focus on is the right sponsor. As we've said, this is the accountable person, the person that's accountable for project success. And there's a whole presentation around project sponsors that we could go into, but that's not the purpose of today. They're accountable for the business outcomes and risks that are enabled by the project. So then they need, if they're accountable for project success and the associated business outcomes that particular project enables, they need to be empowered with appropriate authority and decision-making rights. And that's important. Otherwise, you set them up to be accountable. If you don't twin that with empowerment, you set them up to fail. But project sponsors need to demonstrate that they have the capability and experience to perform that role. It's not something you can pick up and run with without having some knowledge of the project sponsor role. They need to have appropriate capacity to perform the role as well. It's typically an additive to their day job, but it is quite a significant additive if they're going to get it right and give it the emphasis and focus that it deserves. So it is a meaningful commitment, and they need to be committed to make that. They need to be visible. So the last thing you want is your project sponsor to be appointed and them not take an active role in the arrangements, in the operationalization of those project governance arrangements. Steering committees need to have the right membership. This includes members with material roles in the project. They need to be those key stakeholders that you want insights from to help that project sponsor come to optimal decisions. Ideally, you'd need to encompass a diversity in expertise, perspectives, and backgrounds. And that's where you might look at plugging holes with independent advisors if you need to. They need to support the project sponsor in making optimal decisions. That's their role. And whilst they have a day job, when they come into project steering committees, those members and guests need to wear a separate hat, which is a best for project hat. So whilst they contribute insights from their respective areas, all of their deliberation within that project steering committee needs to be focused on best for project outcomes. We need to differentiate between members and guests. Members have a role in decision making, guests contribute insights and maybe recommendations and expertise. You need to control the numbers of people in a steering committee. If you have too many people involved, it transitions from a governance group to an information sharing session. So control of numbers, typically 8 to 12 maximum, is what you'd be aiming for. The Harvard Business School recommends 8 is an optimal number. You need to refresh through the life cycle. Maybe different parties are involved as you move through, maybe different vendors, different expertise from across the organization. So don't keep it static, but always that ideally keep the project sponsor from start to finish to maintain that continuity. Ongoing training and development of project steering committee members is important, as is induction, and you need to have an appropriate secretariat, but they need to be non-dominant. They need to be supportive, but they shouldn't take the role of the chair. You obviously need to arm them with appropriate decision-making rights through the sponsor. So clearly defined authorities supported by specific and logical tolerances. So what I'm talking about there is typically, as I've said, these steering committees don't exist in a vacuum or in isolation. They exist within a whole ecosystem of other project steering groups. Obviously, there's the project manager and the project team. Then you might have a program level and associated governance arrangements there, and portfolio level as well. Each of those should have logical decision rights. The idea being that you push decision making to the lowest practicable level. So you don't burden those more senior strategic groups with decisions that could be made at an appropriate lower level. So I spend a lot of time working with organizations to unpick that decision-making or decision-making hierarchy and the associated escalation thresholds or tolerances. So then you need to have appropriate decision processes, and that's important to understand how decisions are made. Is it by consensus? Is the project sponsor the sole arbiter of decisions? Do you actually then look for particular ways of voting? Do some members have veto on certain matters? That's a complex arrangement, but it's something you need to consider. So you need to actually define your decision-making processes. Don't just assume. Often I see terms of reference that are quiet on decision-making processes. You need well-defined decision escalation and reporting pathways. So whilst we've got those tolerances, if something needs to be escalated, where does it go to? If something needs to be communicated, what's the pathway for that? So there needs to be formal mechanisms for integrating and receiving feedback. Sometimes you have advisory groups or stakeholder groups sitting alongside your steering committees. So they then need to be involved, materially involved, to get value from those groups. How do those communication mechanisms work? Define that. And also then how do PSC members and guests communicate back into the business. That's important, so that the steering committee's decisions are actually communicated back into the business and operationalized. Obviously, your steering committee needs to support investment gates, and some of those things might be dealt with at a higher authority, but it needs to understand its role in those arrangements: investment gates, funding releases, and change control processes. As I've said, one of the things that steering committees need to do is focus on material matters. We've talked a lot about decision making. We've talked a lot about accountability. But so whilst steering committees need to focus on decisions and approvals, they then need to focus on a whole suite of other things. And one of the things you don't want your steering committee to be is just an information dissemination session. You really want them to focus on things that are going to add value and push the project forward. So you need to focus on exceptions and deviations from plans, baselines, thresholds, and standards. You need to ensure that the steering committee focuses on ongoing contribution, not just alignment, material contribution to organisational goals. You deal with escalated matters and matters for escalation. Needs to consider those recommendations and advice from stakeholder groups and advisory groups. Look at key risks and issues. Address interfaces, interdependencies, and cross-portfolio or program impacts. And some of that then might be just to raise an issue that's dealt with by another party or another body within that governance ecosystem. At the end of the day, project steering committees need to add value, but not micromanage. You need to let the project manager and the project team do their job. So don't get in the way of that, but really add value and optimize those delivery arrangements. As I've said right at the start, information is critical to the lifeblood of a project steering committee. It needs to be the right information at the right time. And so information comes into steering committees and it needs to come into those steering committees to look at things like delivery performance, on time, on budget, all those good things, but also, a view to why the investment exists, the outcomes and benefits that it's going to realise. Needs to focus on insights rather than data. So there it needs to be something that is meaningful for that group. Don't shower them with lots of information and data. Provide succinct investment grade information for them to actually quickly grasp on what's important. That all needs to be taken as read before you enter the room. So there's an imperative that you get it to the steering committee an ample duration ahead of that committee to allow the members and guests to be across that material. But then that needs to be taken as read. Don't get into the habit of just getting somebody to do progress updates. Really, you need to focus on those material matters we talked about before. If that means that the meeting is shorter, fantastic, great result. You give that time to people back into their busy days. So focus on those material matters, and then only by exception highlight things from those reports. Needs to enable these steering committees to work properly. Not only do you get your regular reporting, your information papers, briefing papers, decision papers, but you also need appropriate assurance to support decision making, particularly important at stage gates. You need to maintain a comprehensive decision register. Whilst we often have minutes of meetings and we have action trackers or action logs, often what the decisions are buried in minutes of meetings. Have a separate decision log or decision register that captures each of those decisions. That's fantastic to paint a picture of decisions along the journey of a project, which may actually last for months or years. But also it's important then for an audit trail, and particularly then if you have changes in membership as you go along, it's important that you have access to that information so you don't end up re-prosecuting the same decisions, or if you do want to, you have a history of those decisions. Obviously, utilize appropriate technology, that goes without saying today, but encourage better collaboration and efficiency in the way that the steering committee works and members access that information. Lastly, Obviously, there's lots of things we do in terms of framework, structure, process, but the rubber hits the road in how these things are operationalized through the actual practices and behaviors that are exhibited and operationalized in the room, as it were, or in virtual room. So to ensure that you set yourself up for success, you really need to induct and onboard a new governance group. So you're establishing a new project steering committee, induct that group appropriately. And when you bring on new members, you might do that. And when I talk about two hats here, what I'm talking about is actually members and guests understanding that when they come into the room, they have to wear their own hat from their respective organizational role and project role, but then they also need to have a best for project view, enabling optimal decision making for that particular project through the project sponsor. So two hats. Obviously, participation is absolutely critical, but that doesn't mean just turning up to meetings. It's more than that. There's work required prior to a meeting, getting across the reports, as we said, but also liaising with your team to ensure that whatever's important to that project, you understand and is brought into the room to inform those insights and deliberations. Then you might have some post-meeting responsibilities to go back and communicate decisions and outcomes from meetings. As I said, papers need to be read. The session needs to be chaired effectively, ideally through the project sponsor, that focus on material matters. All of this needs to be done in an environment where we're actually looking at constructive, productive behaviours. Often that can be challenging, particularly on contentious issues. But again, best for project should be the aim, which means that you need to maintain good relationship with some of your peers and fellow steering group members. Governance practices need to be alert to changing dynamics. Maybe there's an external change, but maybe there's an internal organizational change or a restructure that may result in some changes in maybe the membership or even the project itself. So you need to be alert to that. Appropriate communication strategies, we said, uphold integrity and confidentiality. Sequencing the meetings is something. So if you then have an escalation path to a project board, and that project board then maybe has an escalation path to an investment or portfolio committee, then logically you should have your project level meetings ahead of your program level meetings, ahead of your portfolio level meetings, to ensure that any escalated decisions are dealt with efficiently without waiting a long time between meetings. There may be an annual cycle that you need to deal with. Maybe there's an annual funding submission or a quarterly process that you need to build into your calendar for your project steering committee. Ideally, you should have regular reviews. Some of that may be through a self-assessment process, but some of it might be through external observation. I spend a lot of time working with organisations and observe different groups and provide feedback to the group, but also maybe work with the sponsor and in a coaching or mentoring role. So those things are quite valuable. So as you've seen, if we can look at these 7 different cogs, shall we say, about getting steering committees right, there's a lot there, but I'd encourage you to actually look at each of these things, because if you can optimize your steering committees, you can optimize decision making and hopefully move your project forward and manage or address some of those critical issues that underpin project success or failure. Where can you get some more insights? The source is a page I have on my website where I regularly release open source one-page guides. There's a lot of one-page guides around different aspects of steering committees on there at the moment, and I'll progressively move through that. And if you want to contact me, here I am, and feel free to contact me on LinkedIn. Thank you. And thank you to the sponsors, and thank you to Julie and Fatima for organising this.
And thank you, Adrian. There's a host of questions that have come up here, and so we've still got 5 minutes for Q&A for you, Adrian. So we're going to throw a couple to the stage for you. It was really insightful, and I was jotting down some notes and doing a few. Oh yeah, that's the same way. You know, getting all that's happened to me. So one of the items that's come up is what determines the frequency of the steering committee meeting, and that's come from Cindy. So thank you for asking that, Cindy, in South Africa.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I mean, often there's a default, let's do it once a month, but you need to actually question where you are in the project life cycle and the likely quantum of material matters and decisions that steering committee is going to have. Because the last thing you want is too many out of session decisions, or informal, on the fly, ad hoc decision making in corridors. That's the last thing you want. So you really need to look at what's an optimal arrangement, and don't be afraid to vary that schedule. You know, I'm actually mobilizing a steering committee with a client at the moment, and we're setting it up on a fortnightly basis with a view that we'll know we'll step it back once we get into a rhythm and once we get through the initial stage where we're actually doing some of the project planning.
Great. And or potentially step it up if you've got
correct.
Some critical.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Yeah. Spot on, Julie.
Thank you very much. Another question from Anne. So thanks, Anne, for asking. There are various performance metrics, KPIs, available to measure steering committee's effectiveness. According to you, what are the top 3 KPIs?
Yes, and that's a really good question. And so if you look at what I talked through, if you look at the concept of material matters, one of the things that I look at when I start looking at analysing steering committees is their focus on those things and the time they give to those things versus time they spend on just progress updates. So that's a really important sort of parameter there, because one's value add more so than the other. The other one, in terms of KPIs, I think it's better to actually get some of the key stakeholders involved in the room to actually provide their view. So you may do that through some form of questionnaire, an anonymous questionnaire, or interviews. So I'm less keen on running a standard set. I'm more keen on actually engaging with the group, because the dynamics can change, the membership can change. You know, the other thing that is a killer is the number of proxies. If you actually have a continued suite of proxies attending instead of the core members, that tells you 2 things, or one of 2 things. Either those members are too busy to attend, or those members don't place any value on attending that committee. So often I talk about people voting with their feet, and that's an important consideration.
It's exactly that. The lack of interest is overwhelming when you never see them at the door. And we've got one more that's come in too from the Harus. So thank you very much. How to handle steering committees when previous PM left and you've newly joined? So
that's a really important one. So as I talked about, induction processes are important, and particularly the PM. There's a critical relationship between this project sponsor and the PM. So that needs to go through an appropriate process. That requires a time commitment from both. They are mutually dependent in terms of their success. So time invested in creating a relationship there, but then also ensure that the PMs across all of the previous decisions has met with the members and has the opportunity to ideally, if there's a transition, attend ahead of the transition. But if they're thrown in at the deep end, you need to make sure that the other steering committees, through the other steering members, through the chair, appropriately understands that the PM's getting up to speed, and provide them with some latitude in that respect. Easier said than done, but that's important.
And I was just about to reiterate that and say, yes, 9 times out of 10, usually it is because the PM's left the building and someone's come on. But as you say, you can only do what you can, and have
that's
that
exactly right.
Setting them up. Well, we're at time now, and so once again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and great presentation. I'm sure you're going to get inundated with questions and people reaching out to you, because it was really interesting and very worthwhile. So thanks again.
Thanks, Julie, and apologise for the slide problem, but hopefully we got there in the end.
We got there in the end, and that's the most thing. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. See you all at the next session. See you all at the next session. We are having a quick 15-minute break. So remember, hashtag to put your insights into how you anything that you've come across. Make sure you also call out Adrian. Visit our booths. See you in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.